The headline blinked across every screen in the financial world. Billionaire CEO who voted for Trump sounds the alarm on Fed attacks. In an instant, silence fell over trading floors from Wall Street to Chicago, a tension so thick it felt almost tangible. Ken Griffin, a titan of finance, a man whose wealth could move markets with a single word, had broken his silence. And the world took notice. Investors paused mid-trade, analysts furiously tapped keyboards, and the Twitterverse erupted with disbelief. How could a loyal Trump supporter, someone whose fortune had grown alongside the very system the president, now targeted, publicly challenge the attacks on the Federal Reserve? Griffin's words were not mild warnings. They were a full-throated alarm, a challenge that cut through the usual political noise. For a moment, the room seemed frozen. Headlines multiplied, each more incredulous than the last. Trump criticized. By own backer. Citadel CEO warns of economic chaos. Billionaire breaks party line. Every notification pinged like a drumbeat of approaching storm. And at the center, Griffin remained calm, measured, almost serene, as if he had been waiting for this precise moment. But beneath the surface, this was more than economics. This was a collision of identities, values, and visions for America. Stakes were higher than interest rates or inflation numbers. They were about trust, institutional integrity, and the very rules that separate order from chaos. Every eye turned to Washington. Every mind asked the same question. What would happen when a hero of finance confronted the arrogance threatening the nation's economic backbone? As the op-ed went live, the ripple began. Tweets multiplied. Opinion, pieces flew. And yet the most shocking twist was yet to come. A confrontation that would leave not just markets, but the country itself, holding its breath, waiting to see which force would prevail. The room buzzed with quiet panic as economists and investors digested the full implications of Trump's relentless attacks on the Federal Reserve. For months, his tweets had questioned the Fed's independence, criticized interest rate hikes, and even hinted at firing officials who refused to bend to his will. On the surface, it sounded like political theater, another episode in the president's relentless media storm. But beneath the spectacle, experts recognized a far more dangerous game, a gamble with consequences that could ripple through every American household. Inflation, already a specter haunting grocery store aisles and gas pumps hung in the balance. Each attack on the Fed threatened to destabilize confidence, creating uncertainty in markets that were already jittery. Bonds wavered, stocks quivered, and pension funds across the nation braced for turbulence. Millions of Americans, from young families saving for college to retirees relying on steady returns, were suddenly caught in a storm they hadn't seen coming. And yet, Griffin's warning cut through the fog like a beacon. He knew the Fed's independence was more than a technical detail. It was the backbone of economic stability. Interference, he argued, was not just risky, it was reckless. A president dismissing governors or pressuring policy shifts could trigger panic, shrink investment, and erode trust in the system that had long kept the American economy humming. It was not just about numbers on a balance sheet. This was about real lives. Homeowners watching mortgage rates climb, small business owners facing higher loan costs, families confronting rising prices at the checkout. The ripple effects of destabilizing the Fed would not discriminate by wealth or status. The shockwaves would hit across the nation, and yet few dared to speak out, fearing political reprisal or public backlash. Griffin's stance, therefore, was both courageous and incendiary. Here was a man with a foot in both worlds, a billionaire, a Republican donor, yet someone willing to confront the president's bravado in defense of institutions larger than any one person. His warning was more than a headline. It was a clarion call, a signal that the battle lines were drawn, and the consequences would be felt far beyond the marble halls of Washington. The tension was palpable. Would the president heed the warnings, or would the economic foundations begin to quake under political pressure? The nation's future, measured in livelihoods, savings, and trust in the system, hung in the balance. As Griffin's words circulated, debates erupted across social media, financial news, and dinner tables alike. Every American, knowingly or not, was now invested in this high-stakes drama. And the question remained, when the forces of arrogance clash with the forces of reason, who would emerge unshaken? Donald Trump's relationship with the Federal Reserve has always been one of tension and control. From the moment he took office in 2017, his administration sought to reshape the nation's economic institutions to align with his vision. A pivotal moment came when he nominated Jerome Powell as Fed chairman, a choice that seemed to signal a new era of cooperation. However, as Powell's policies began to diverge from Trump's preferences, the facade of partnership quickly crumbled. Trump's frustration with Powell intensified as the Fed raised interest rates to combat inflation. The president, whose business empire thrived on cheap credit, viewed these hikes as direct threats to his financial interests. He publicly criticized Powell, calling the rate increases reckless and political, and suggested that the Fed was working against his economic agenda. This marked the beginning of a series of confrontations that would define his approach to the central bank. In 2025, Trump's tactics escalated. He attempted to remove Fed Governor Lisa Cook, alleging mortgage fraud, a claim widely seen as politically motivated. Cook, a prominent African-American economist, had been a vocal advocate for the Fed's independence and had resisted Trump's pressure to lower interest rates. Her removal was part of a broader strategy to reshape the Fed's composition, replacing independent thinkers with allies who would align with his economic policies. The international community took notice. Andrew Bailey, governor of the Bank of England, warned that Trump's attacks on the Fed posed a very serious situation, potentially undermining global economic stability. Similarly, Christine Lagarde, president of the European Central Bank, expressed deep concern, stating that such actions could have dire consequences for both the U.S. and the world economy. Trump's broader economic agenda also reflected his desire to exert control over financial institutions. He signed Executive Order 14178, which prohibited the establishment or promotion of a central bank digital currency, aiming to limit the Fed's ability to innovate in digital finance. Additionally, his administration's push for tariffs and trade policies under the Mar-a-Lago Accord indicated a preference for direct intervention in economic matters, sidelining traditional institutions like the Fed. These actions painted a picture of a leader willing to sacrifice institutional independence for short-term political gain. As the battle over the Fed's future intensified, the question remained: would the president's relentless pursuit of control over the central bank succeed, or would the institution's resilience preserve its autonomy? The stakes were higher than ever, and the outcome would have lasting implications for the nation's economic future. Ken Griffin's story begins far from the gilded towers of Wall Street, in a world defined by discipline, intellect, and relentless ambition. Born in 1968 in Daytona Beach, Florida, Griffin showed an early fascination with numbers and markets. While other kids were playing video games, he was coding algorithms on a Commodore 64, experimenting with ways to predict patterns in the stock market. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the seed of a mind that would one day navigate the most complex financial systems in the world with uncanny precision. Griffin's journey was not without challenge. He attended Harvard University, majoring in economics, and quickly became known for his analytical brilliance. While many of his peers were satisfied with theoretical exercises, Griffin was driven by results, testing his strategies in the real markets. By the age of 21, he had executed his first major trades from a dorm room, amassing capital that would become the foundation for Citadel, a firm that would grow into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse. His rise was meteoric, yet it was never simply about wealth. Griffin understood the responsibility that came with influence, the power to affect jobs, pensions, and the economic livelihoods of millions. Politically, Griffin has long identified as a Republican, contributing to campaigns and supporting candidates who aligned with his vision of economic growth and market stability. He voted for Donald Trump, recognizing the promise of policies that emphasize deregulation, corporate growth, and American competitiveness. Yet, Griffin's loyalty was never blind. Unlike many who follow party lines unquestioningly, he measured every action against principle, logic, and long-term consequence. It was this principle-driven mindset that led Griffin to speak out against Trump's attacks on the Federal Reserve. The op-ed he co-authored with economist Anil Kashyap was not a casual critique. It was a calculated stand. Griffin recognized the danger. Undermining the Fed's independence risked not only market stability, but the trust and livelihoods of everyday Americans. He saw beyond politics, framing his argument around reason, prudence, and the moral obligation to protect institutions that preserve economic order. His decision to break ranks with a president he had once supported was seismic. In the eyes of the media, it was shocking. In the eyes of Wall Street, it was courageous. Griffin became more than a CEO. He became a guardian of economic integrity, a voice for those who understood that the strength of a nation depends not on the whims of a single office holder, but on the resilience of its institutions. Griffin's empathy extended beyond spreadsheets and balance sheets.
Friends, colleagues, and employees describe him as thoughtful, deliberate, and even quiet, the type who listens twice as much as he speaks. Yet when he does speak, his words carry weight, precision, and authority. This combination of intellect,
conscience, and courage positioned him uniquely for the moment he faced in confronting Trump's unprecedented pressure on the Fed. As Griffin stepped forward, the stakes were clear. He was not only defending financial structures, but challenging arrogance, power, and short-term recklessness. His life's work, the rise of Citadel, the cultivation of a principled approach to markets, and a commitment to reason over partisanship, had prepared him for this confrontation. The world watched as a billionaire, a Republican donor, and a seasoned financier transformed into a symbol of calm, reasoned resistance, setting the stage for a battle that would test courage, conviction, and the very resilience of America's economic institutions. The air in the room crackled with tension as the debate began, a gathering that had been billed as routine but quickly turned into something extraordinary. On one side sat Donald Trump's closest economic advisors, their expressions sharp, confident, and defensive. On the other side, Ken Griffin, calm yet unyielding, radiated the quiet authority of someone who understood the stakes better than anyone present. The cameras rolled, the audience leaned in, and every word spoken seemed poised to tip the balance of an already fragile economic landscape. Trump's allies opened with a barrage of talking points, emphasizing loyalty, party unity, and the notion that the Fed needed to follow the president's lead to stimulate growth. Their tone was aggressive, almost theatrical, a calculated attempt to corner Griffin into compliance. They cited short-term stock gains and consumer confidence indices, suggesting that any criticism of the administration was, by default, unpatriotic. The room felt smaller with each statement, the air heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Griffin listened, expression neutral, allowing the momentum to build. Then, without raising his voice, he began to unravel their arguments with surgical precision. He spoke of historical precedent, the perils of political interference in central banking, and the real-world consequences of destabilizing market confidence. Each point was delivered with calm authority, the kind of quiet confidence that commands attention not through volume, but through intellect and reason. The advisors faltered, occasionally glancing at each other, caught between allegiance and the undeniable weight of Griffin's reasoning. The tension escalated as Trump's allies attempted to corner him with hypothetical crises, scenarios designed to provoke fear and doubt. Griffin responded not with anger, but with clarity. He detailed how every reckless move, every public attack on the Fed could ripple through pensions, mortgages, and retirement funds across the nation. He painted the stakes not in abstract economic terms, but in human lives, the single mothers, the small business owners, the retirees whose futures hung in balance. The room grew silent, the gravity of his words settling over every observer. The debate progressed. The contrast became stark. On one side, bluster, ambition, and short-term calculation. On the other, measured wisdom, integrity, and foresight. The clash was cinematic, almost operatic in its intensity, a battle of principles, rather than personalities. And yet, even as Griffin's arguments landed with precision, there remained a lingering question. Would reason prevail over loyalty and ambition? Or would the forces aligned against him find a way to undermine his warnings before the consequences became irreversible? The cameras captured every expression, the flicker of doubt, the tightening of jaws, the subtle shifts in posture. Social media feeds began to explode in real time, analysts live tweeting, commentators dissecting, and the nation watching, riveted. The confrontation had become more than a debate. It was a spectacle of accountability, a public reckoning that exposed not only policy differences, but the very character of the leaders involved. And just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, a quiet moment fell over Griffin. He looked directly at the audience, his next words poised to strike a blow that would echo far beyond this room. The question lingered in every mind. Could a single voice, calm and principled, alter the course of an entire administration's approach to economic governance? The answer, the world would soon discover, was about to unfold in the most dramatic way imaginable. Griffin rose slowly, letting the weight of the room settle into silence. Cameras clicked, microphones adjusted, but he did not rush. Every eye was on him, every mind anticipating the next move in a drama that had already captured the nation's attention. Then, with a steady voice and measured cadence, he began. Each word deliberate, each phrase building momentum, like the tightening coil of a spring ready to release. He started with data. Charts flickered on the screen behind him, illustrating interest rate trends, inflation patterns, and the delicate balance the Federal Reserve maintained to protect both markets and ordinary citizens. Griffin pointed to historical examples, where political interference had led to volatility, recessions, and economic instability. The room, once filled with confident assertions from Trump's allies, began to lean forward, the sharp edge of skepticism replaced by grudging attention. "You cannot substitute rhetoric for reason," Griffin said, his gaze sweeping the advisors, journalists, and analysts in the room. "The Fed's independence is not a luxury. It is the foundation upon which the trust of the American people and the global financial system rests. To undermine it for political gain is not strategy. It is recklessness." His voice remained calm, but each word struck like a hammer against steel. He cited the latest figures: mortgage rates climbing, pension funds under pressure, savings eroded by inflation fears. "Every tweet, every public attack on the Fed's credibility reverberates far beyond Washington," he continued. "This is not abstract. These are real families facing real consequences, and make no mistake, the world is watching." Griffin's words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Trump's allies attempted to interrupt, hurling political talking points, arguing that Griffin was overreacting, that markets would self-correct. Griffin's response was surgical. He dismantled each claim with a mix of economic rigor and plain-spoken logic. "Self-correction takes trust," he said, "and trust is fragile. Once it's broken, it cannot be willed back by promises or political bravado. Markets do not respond to slogans. They respond to credibility, consistency, and prudence." He then pivoted to the moral argument, a layer often absent from discussions of finance. Griffin painted a picture of responsibility, emphasizing that leadership is measured not in applause or short-term gain, but in foresight, integrity, and service to the greater good. Power without accountability is dangerous. Authority without principle is destructive. And wealth, no matter how vast, is meaningless if it does not serve to protect what is greater than oneself. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that precedes revelation. Reporters paused mid-note. Advisors exchanged uneasy glances, and for a brief, almost cinematic moment, it felt as if the world itself had taken a collective breath. Griffin's words had shifted the energy of the debate. What had begun as a confrontation steeped in political theater had transformed into a moral reckoning. He then delivered his crescendo, the mic drop moment that would be quoted across headlines and echoed in opinion pieces for days to come. He outlined a clear roadmap: respect the Fed's independence, allow evidence-based policy to guide decisions, and recognize that the true strength of leadership is the courage to admit limits and defer to expertise. Each recommendation was simple, yet profound, a masterclass in clarity and authority. Griffin's final statement resonated far beyond the room. History will judge those who chose loyalty to personal ambition over loyalty to the people and the institutions that safeguard their future. The question is not whether you can act against the Fed. It is whether you will act responsibly, with foresight, and with courage. The words landed like a thunderclap, reverberating through newsrooms, Twitter feeds, and financial circles worldwide. The impact was immediate. Analysts scrambled to interpret, journalists raced to broadcast, and social media erupted with hashtags, praising Griffin's courage and insight. Meanwhile, Trump's allies shifted uneasily, realizing that the debate had transformed from a contest of talking points to a confrontation of principle versus impulse. Griffin had not only defended the Fed, he had exposed the fragility of authority when untempered by reason. As he sat back down, the room remained charged with tension and awe. What had been expected to be a routine discussion had evolved into a defining moment, a clash between the force of reason and the force of arrogance. Griffin had emerged as the steady voice, the calm in the storm, and the nation now watched, waiting for the next move, aware that the consequences of this confrontation would unfold far beyond this room. The moment Griffin's op-ed hit the presses, the shockwaves were instantaneous. Headlines splashed across news outlets from New York to Los Angeles. Billionaire CEO breaks ranks with Trump. Citadel's Griffin warns of Fed chaos. Wall Street's voice of reason confronts presidential arrogance. On trading, floor's conversations paused mid-sentence, screens flickering with stock tickers as investors tried to reconcile the unexpected defiance of a figure once seen as aligned with the administration. The world was watching, riveted by a confrontation that had transcended politics and entered the realm of national consequence. Social media erupted. Tweets, posts, and viral threads multiplied in seconds. Supporters of institutional independence hailed Griffin as a hero, praising his courage to speak truth to power. Hashtags like "Das Fed Matters" and "Das Griffin Stands" spread like wildfire, becoming rallying cries for Americans worried about the stability of their economy. Memes and video clips highlighted his calm, authoritative delivery, contrasting it with the brashness of Trump's allies. Commentators across networks replayed segments of his arguments, dissecting his reasoning, while opinion pieces framed him as a modern guardian of economic integrity. But the response was not uniform. Trump loyalists fired back, accusing Griffin of disloyalty and questioning his motives. Conservative commentators painted him as a traitor to the party, a billionaire abandoning ideological loyalty in pursuit of self-interest. Online forums erupted, with debates, some defensive, others hostile, creating a polarized digital battlefield. Yet even in criticism, Griffin's presence dominated the conversation, forcing opponents to engage with the substance of his arguments rather than ignore them. Meanwhile, fellow financial leaders quietly rallied in his support. Executives from major banks and investment firms acknowledged the truth of his warnings, echoing concerns about undermining the Fed's independence. Some offered public statements backing Griffin's stance, while others used private channels to urge policymakers to heed his advice. The effect was a subtle but undeniable shift. The economic establishment, once largely silent, began to assert its voice, lending weight to the argument that Griffin's intervention was not merely personal, but principled. The public discourse extended far beyond financial circles. Late-night shows, podcasts, and editorial boards debated the confrontation as a moral as well as economic issue. Citizens questioned the accountability of leaders and the role of institutions meant to protect them from political whim. Griffin became a symbol, a focal point for discussions about integrity, foresight, and the responsibilities of power. Schools of thought emerged overnight, contrasting reason and impulsive authority, and ordinary Americans found themselves invested in the drama of policy and principle. In the midst of this uproar, the real power of Griffin's stand became clear. He had forced a nation to reckon with the consequences of unchecked political interference. He had created a dialogue that cut across partisan lines, making the abstract tangible, the distant immediate, and the complex understandable. As analysts predicted potential market reactions, the story continued to unfold, each day layering new interpretations, responses, and reflections. And yet, even as the applause and criticism swirled, one question lingered in the minds of all who followed the story. Would reason and prudence ultimately prevail over arrogance and ambition, or had the stakes only grown higher, leaving the nation on the precipice of an uncertain economic future? The answer remained suspended, a tension that promised more drama, more confrontation, and more lessons about power, principle, and responsibility. As the dust settled from the public confrontation, the true significance of Griffin's stand became undeniable. It was more than a clash of personalities or partisan politics. It was a lesson in the importance of principles, integrity, and institutional independence. The Federal Reserve, often perceived as a distant, abstract body, suddenly became a symbol of trust, stability, and foresight. Griffin had reminded the nation that some pillars of democracy and economic health exist above individual ambition, above rhetoric, and above fleeting political gain. He had shown that courage is not always loud. It is not the bombast of headlines or the fire of tweets. True courage is measured in calm, reasoned conviction, in the willingness to speak when the stakes are highest and the consequences most uncertain. By challenging the very president he had once supported, Griffin embodied a rare kind of heroism, one rooted not in ideology, but in accountability, wisdom, and foresight. His message resonated far beyond Wall Street, that defending truth and responsibility is a duty, even when it risks wealth, influence, or personal alliances. The moral was clear. Political interference in institutions designed to protect public welfare carries real consequences. It threatens not only markets, but livelihoods, families, and the trust that binds a nation together. Griffin's intervention had illuminated a crucial truth: progress, stability, and the collective good depend on people willing to act on principle, even against the currents of power. He had reframed the debate from a partisan squabble into a universal lesson on stewardship, responsibility, and ethical leadership. For the audience, particularly those who valued dignity, identity, and justice, this was a moment of validation. It affirmed that standing up for what is right, even against popular pressure, even against immense political power, is both necessary and impactful. Griffin's courage offered inspiration, proving that a single voice, guided by principle and reason, can shift the conversation, influence public discourse, and safeguard the systems that support society. As the nation reflected, the lesson lingered. Institutions exist to serve the people, not the ambitions of a few. Leadership is measured not by loyalty to individuals, but by commitment to truth, fairness, and the long-term well-being of the collective. And in that reflection, Griffin's legacy took shape, not just as a financier, but as a guardian of integrity, a reminder that heroism often comes in the form of quiet, unwavering resistance to arrogance and recklessness. The story closed with clarity. Dignity and principle, once upheld, echo far beyond the moment, shaping the future in ways that power alone cannot achieve. The story of Ken Griffin standing up to Trump's attacks on the Federal Reserve is more than a headline. It is a lesson in courage, principle, and responsibility. A billionaire, a Republican donor, yet unwavering in defense of truth and institutional integrity, Griffin became a symbol that reason and foresight can prevail, even in the face of immense pressure. His actions remind us that standing for what is right, regardless of popularity or personal allegiance, has the power to shape the nation's future. Now the question is not only who will lead wisely, but who among us will choose to uphold integrity in our own lives. Every viewer has a role in fostering accountability, spreading awareness, and defending the values that sustain society. If this story inspired you, share it with friends, spark discussions, and join the conversation online. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth analyses of the moments that define our times, moments where courage meets consequence and principle confronts power. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Remember, awareness is the first step. Action is the next, and together we can ensure that reason, dignity, and truth are never silenced.